guys, so once again, Moody with Performance Unleashed, and this is my area of expertise, if you will. You're going to get a gauge kit with every turbo kit. Doesn't matter if you go through us or not, but we're going to be giving you a deal on these gauges that basically you can't get anywhere else unless you already have a set of gauges. Our wiring harnesses are all pre-made, and you're going to get them basically almost all assembled so that you don't have to worry about which goes where. There are a few things that you have to know, and this video will show you every single thing that you need to know for the gauges, whether it's inside, taking the dash apart, wiring these and connecting them up to the gauges, running them through the firewall, connecting them to power and ground, and startup. Every turbo kit that launches, that sells, during the launch period, will get these gauges delivered with the turbo kit. If you buy the turbo kit after launch, you'll be paying the retail price and it'll be shipped to you separately. You're going to get a small gray box, it's cardboard, and it has all of this stuff inside of it. I'm going to explain every single piece of this harness. The gauges that we have right now are already in the car because we had to mock them up. So I'm going to explain that as we're going there. The most important part is your main harness. This harness has your power and ground connector. It has the O2 or the AFR OLED sensor. This goes to the gauge itself. And it has a power connector that goes to one of the other two gauges. Those gauges daisy chain. And what that means is all you have to do to connect the other gauge to power is connect this to the first gauge and then connect it to the second gauge. So these being talked
come pre-wired, right? They'll come pre-wired up in the gauges?
Yep. So when you get your kit, this is going to be connected to the first gauge, this is going to be connected to the second gauge, and this is going to be connected to the AFR gauge, the dual OLED one. This is all going to be wired in. This is the control box for that AFR OLED gauge. This is your AFR sensor connector. This is a 6-pin that goes in this 6-hole. And this side goes to a Bosch LSU 4.9 sensor. So the sensor for this vehicle is already here, but you're just going to connect this in the engine bay and then basically route it to the hot side piping, the one that has the bung that's already welded on it. For people that don't have the turbo kit that are getting an AFR gauge, it'll come with a bung and a stop plug for it. You're going to have to get this welded to your exhaust if you already don't have one. This silicone boost hose goes to this, which is the boost box and control box that goes to the AFR gauge. The dual function gauge is an AFR and a boost gauge basically. So both of these will get connected to that same gauge over here. And this connector, you can either run it through the firewall into the engine bay for boost, and this will be your boost reference, or you can keep it tucked away and just run silicone hose through the firewall. It's up to you. This line is long enough to be able to go to the engine bay. Next up is the power and ground wire. It's got a 3-pin connector that only fits in one way, like that, okay? From here, you have 2 fuse adders and 1 ground ring. This ground ring, I'll show you exactly where it goes, but these 2 fuse adders are different. Every kit that comes out with the turbo kit is going to have 2 different ones. The one that has 2 blue 15 amp fuses will go to the cigarette lighter. The one that has a 15 and a 10 will most likely go to the audio or a memory, okay? These are very distinct. One of these has to go to a fuse that always has power, which is this one. So you need to either use the memory fuse, the audio fuse, or something else that you know has power even with the key off, okay? So like your radio that has the preset settings that are saved, that has power. Something like this is what it needs. This wire will go to something that has switched power. So once you put the key in and you turn the car on, the accessories, this gets power. cigarette lighter works really well. If you don't wire them up that way, the gauges will either not retain the memory settings that you have, or they just won't turn on properly. So you need to make sure that you use it and route them the way that we tell you for the BK238s. BK1s may vary, and some BK2s might be different. I've had experiences where the fuse boxes were a little different. If you're unsure and you can't find the ones that we told you about, cigarette lighter, audio, memory, send us a message. We'll help you out. This ground ring, I'll explain exactly where it goes later, but basically it goes to a 10mm bolt right under that driver's side fuse box in here, and it basically gets sandwiched into the chassis, and that's it. That's all power and ground. This is your sensor wire harness. These are the oil temperature and pressure sensors, as we talked about before, that are now bolted to the front of your block and have the sensor probes inside. You're just going to take this apart, and you're going to run this sensor harness through the firewall. For the BK2s, 14, 15, and 16 model years, you have a sound tube that goes from your stock intake into the firewall. Take that sound tube out when you're putting the turbo kit on, and you're going to have a hole that goes straight into the firewall. For 2013 and earlier model years, there's no sound tube, so it's just a basic block. What you can do is one of two things. You can either drill a hole in that block and make sure you don't get any wiring damaged, or you can take the two 10mm bolts out, pry it out for a little bit, slide the harness in through the firewall, and then tighten it back up again. This pet sleeve is crushable, but it's firm, so it will not crush the harness wiring itself. So this will take the brunt of the force, and you don't have to tighten that, that cover on all the way, but it has to be snug. It's just a dust shield. So either way works fine. One of the things I'm going to show you is how to route this and what I find works really well. And then the same thing when you're routing this is the same thing you're going to do with the boost hose. You're just going to route it through the firewall. And now I'm going to show you inside the vehicle how to take your dash apart and how to put the gauges in, how to take all the connectors off, and then route through the wiring.
All right. So, now that we've explained everything about the gauges and where the wires and everything are, I'm going to show you how to take apart the dash. It's very simple, but if you've never taken apart before, or if your car is new to this, it's going to be a little more difficult. The first thing you got to do is take this shifter box out. If you're an automatic, what you're going to need to do is put your car in accessory mode so that you can put the shifter into drive and then turn everything off so you're not wasting battery power. You're just going to pull up from the boot around the back, and it's going to pry up. It's going to come up pretty forcefully, so be careful with it. You're not going to damage much by pulling, but you got to pull up from the back like this. So if it's here, you're doing this motion so that these tabs don't get broken. From there, you're going to move this all the way far back as much as possible. And then you're just going to grab the bottom and you're going to wiggle it out. There's no bolts or anything like that holding this in. It's just pressure. It's a little tough to see from over the front, but there's 5 or 6 connectors, depending on your trim model, in the back over here. A flathead will really work wonders with you, but if you don't have one, you're just going to have to press down on the tabs to remove everything. As you can see, the gauges are already installed in this, so this connector, this one right here, was supposed to be bolted to the gauges, and it's just a tab. Press on the middle and pull it right out. Same thing with all the other ones. Press and wiggle and pry it out. The one on the bottom is a pain because it's at such a tight location, but as you can see, it's this tab right here. You push down and you pull it. Cigarette lighter is the easiest one. You just pull, and your dash comes out. So, your OEM cluster is a printed circuit board. It's take it or leave it, all or none, and it's held in by 1, 2, 3, and 4 Phillips head screws. These screws you need for these gauges. You're getting the Snoopy pod, which is this bezel right here, and it bolts to the stock location for the gauges. And this is crucial. do not put the gauges in the bezel until the bezel is in here. The gauges will not fit on the outside because they're thicker than the hole. So bezel goes in, bolt, 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 or whatever, screws, and then you put it in however you want. Pro tip, sometimes the gauges will be a 0.5 millimeter larger than the bezel, so it won't fit properly. Heat up the bezel from the back with a blow dryer and work the gauges in. It'll expand the plastic and it'll make it easier to slide the gauges in. Now that the gauges are inside, you're going to see all of these different connectors. The top two on these two gauges, the 4 color ones, the top two are your power wires. So that power wire I told you about, one goes in here, and then the other daisy chains all the way back here. The bottom ones for those two are the sensor harness. So the oil pressure and the oil temperature gauge. This is your oil pressure, and that's your oil temperature. You'll be able to tell them apart from each other because the oil pressure has 3 wires going to it, and the oil temperature has 2 wires going to it, and they're different colors. This black one is the AFR sensor. Once again, it's the 5 wire. It's black. It looks different from everything else. That's how you wire the gauges up. So I'm going to show you how to run the gauges in, or how to run the sensor harness from inside the trunk, from inside here in the firewall, and how to run the power wire all the way to the fuse box. So this part's crucial. And I'm recommending doing this part before you do anything with the prep work in the engine bay. Because when you're putting in that fuse box, one of the things that you have to do is relocate it back there. It covers the sound tube. So you're not going to be able to put anything in this area. So this needs to be out of the way first. And like I said, here's your sound tube, right, for 2013, late 2013 and up. And before 2013, this is flat, right? So there's none of this. So you have 2 10 millimeter bolts, one here, one here. Take these 2 out and pull this thing forward. Slide your harnesses in, push it back in, and tighten it up. Just snug, right? You don't need to tighten it to the point where, you know, it's pinching too much of the wires. So, here's your silicone hose. What you're going to do is...
Use the one from the kit.
Yeah, we can do that too. So, I completely forgot about this. You're getting silicone hose with your turbo kit. It's the same hose. This is just extra. Okay. For your own pleasure. Same exact thing. This hose, right, you're going to run in here. It's kind of a fishy situation. You have to push this in, and there's kind of an S-bend in this box, so things might get caught and kinked. So what you're going to have to do is snake it back and forth and make sure that there's no resistance and stuff goes in. Okay? If all goes well, this should be at the ground behind the glove box. Same thing with this harness. As you can see, pretty long ones. Right? This is designed so that putting this to the oil filter housing, you should be able to run it all the way back, all the way across into the A-pillar if you so desire. It's going to be tight, but I have it on my car, so you'll be fine. So you're going to have more than enough to get this harness to the center pod. Put it in from the connector side because these are the smaller areas. It'll be easier to snake them through. Once again, you're going to have to fish and play with it. Sometimes it'll come in on the first try. Sometimes it won't. So just back and forth. Run it down until you're sure that there's enough. Kind of like how I'm doing it. So now let's come and see how I did. Sometimes we won't be able to see the wires on the ground. And that's fine. What you're going to do is you're just going to bring your hand here bring it all the way up against the wall, and pull. And this is the hard part. Once you have the wires here, you're set. Okay? You don't want to pull them through, right? So that you have to start looking over, but it's clear that I have enough. So this is all set right now. Don't worry about this. You're gonna go back in there, and I'm gonna show you how to route it through into the middle. There's this side panel right here, okay? A lot of people are just gonna yank on it, and that's gonna break the tabs. But if you push here and bend, it pops right out, okay? You don't need to take this off because there's a screw here, but this gives you enough space to be able to run the wires. So you're gonna go here, besides the heater core, in the back. Take this out. I'm going to go in from the other side. Hello. So, right here, that's kind of an awkward position, but if you snake it from right here in the front, you'll see the wires, most likely, in the center console. And you're just going to pull, grab, put that wire right here, okay? Same thing with the Busos. Snake it, get in, and up. Thank you, sir.
No problem.
All right. Once they're snaked in, you have enough space. This can be closed up after you've tucked them away. So.
What about the wideband?
Yep.
Yeah.
So, 2 wires and 3 wires. As I said before, white and black goes to oil temperature. White, red, and black goes to oil pressure. And it only fits in one way. And like I said, I've designed these so that they barely fit. So they're snug, there's not enough slack, and so you have enough space to actually make them fit without tightening them. Okay? From here, you have to do the same thing. Yep. With the AFR sensor. So this is the boost box for the AFR and OLED gauge. This is your AFR sensor. Snake it through the same exact way as before. Once again, this is a very long harness, so you shouldn't have any issues getting this through to wherever your AFR gauge is. 6. Only fits in one way. Okay? I'll show you how to put that in a second. So, you want to snake this in from the connector side, the small one. And the more wires you put in here, the tougher it's going to be to get the next wire in. So you're just going to have to be a little patient. And sometimes you can finagle the wires around, make some more room for yourself. But it'll take 5-10 minutes your first time doing it because there's this rubber grommet in the way. It's a dust seal. It's an annoying one. There we go. There we go.
It's down, and here it is. There it is. So Moody said, feed it up through here.
So,
Go ahead, grab it from in there.
yeah, I can. Wiggle it around. I think I got it.
Nice. And there you go.
All right. This goes to this boost control, this box. And then this box goes to the power. Now, you can tuck this in here, or you can leave it out if you have an external data logger, piggyback ECU, which we don't have, or if you have like a computer that you want to actually do data logs with. There's a cable that comes with this box. It's 3-pin. You're going to need to solder that to your data logger because I don't have access to it. If you have a data logger, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you don't worry about this. Tuck it in. You're all set. This will go to the AFR gauge right here. Right here in the power way. It only goes in one way. So, forgive me for taking a little bit longer than usual. No, other way. Sometimes they don't like to cooperate with me. Alright, I'll put it in here to this guy. Come on. There we go. So, this is what I was talking about with the daisy chain, as they call it. This power wire goes in here, like so, and then it goes to this one. Now, both of these two gauges on the side share the same power and ground. And then this one goes to this gauge, like that. So now, you have that. And there's one more sensor that goes to that gauge, which is the boost wire, which this goes to. So you're going to tuck this in here, like so. You know, the manufacturer of these gauges gave us a ton of wiring, which is great, except for the fact that it basically gets tangled everywhere. So you have to play Tetris in here to make sure that everything fits well. Now you have this that needs to go to the boost box, but everything else except power is wired. So, give me 1 second. Ta-da! This gets plugged in to your boost hose, and this is where a zip tie comes in handy. In case you overboost, pops this line off. Any of these connections, 1, 2, and 3, get some zip ties, cut them, they won't pop off. It's not like they're easy to come off anyways, but you can never be too safe.
And thankfully, the zip ties are a part of the kit.
Exactly. It's almost like we thought of this stuff, man.
I know.
So, this is your boost box. It has a slot for a bolt if you really want to bolt it down to something. Never had an issue. And once again, if you decide that you want to route this through the firewall and not the silicone boost hose, that's totally fine because this, I think, is 10 feet. So, run it, down the firewall just like all the other wires, and then have this be on the outside. However your preference is. This goes in here, tucked away, and it gets bolted. Your connected to the middle harness, to the middle gauge. Done. So now that your gauges are all wired, you just need to connect your power wire. This comes in from here. All right. So the last part is to run the power wire into your gauges. Similar to the other side, you have this little trim piece. Ready? Push in from the end and pull from the center. Comes right out. Okay? You're going to run this connector in here from this side all the way up. Get in, find it, and connect it. Hopefully without dropping the gauges like I did. And of course, this is more awkward than it is hard, just because it's in a tight space. It would also help to have someone who has really small hands. The good thing about the wire loom that we use is that it's abrasion proof, heat proof, temperature proof, and chemical resistant. So, you start running it against something that's like this, it starts chafing, it'll handle that for a little bit. So, now that this is routed over here, right, you're going to want to snake this up in this area. And there's a wire loom and a few other areas that you can basically wrap this around so that it doesn't fall down. And we've provided you with a lot of zip ties, so use one or two of those to hold the wires close to whatever loom you're holding it to. Once again, push in, pull out, comes out, so that you can run this up. I don't know how easy it is for you to see from this area, but I'm going to start by running this behind this wire harness so that it faces the back here. And there's a wire here that you can zip tie it to. From there, you're going to go above the steering rack. Like so. And then run this above the wire loom here. Like so. So now it's staying like there. This ground ring is going to get bolted here. So you're going to want to run it above this wire loom as well, so it doesn't get kinked or grab anything. Right here for now. And then these two are going to come up from here. You see one and two. Alright. Your fuse box. Remember how I said they're both different? There's a 15 and a 10, and a 15 and a 15. The two 15s for your actual power to turn the gauges on is going to go to your cigarette lighter. That's a 15 amp. On different cars, it'll be a different fuse, but it's most likely going to be one of these ones. And it's going to be a 15 amp for the cigarette lighter. The 15 and 10 is going to go to any 10 amp memory fuse. So do you see the memory one? That's a 10 amp, and that has power all the time. That's going to retain the gauge settings that you have. So if you want the gauges to be red, that's a memory setting. So memory one is right here. It's a 10 amp. This one. And I'm going to grab my fuse puller. Pro tip. Your vehicle has a fuse puller in the driver's side fuse box in the engine bay. this back when you're done, because it's invaluable. And this is how it works. Find the fuse you want. I'm going to pick the memory one. So 10 amp, 15 amp, 10 amp. Grab and pull. There's no need for a pair of pliers or anything like that. That'll damage the fuses. These are called micro fuses. The blades are very small. They don't protrude much. These are called mini fuses. The blades obviously protrude. So this is the memory one. You're going to run it upside down like so. Push it in. It's going to stick out like that. The cigarette lighter for this car is right on top of the memory. So memory is 10 amp, cigarette lighter is 15 amp. You're going to run that one right above it, like so. And these fuse adders have the right amount of amperage fuses for the actual circuit. So these two are the actual circuit. The inside fuses are the ones for the gauges. So your power wiring is all set. And now you're going to take this 10 amp fuse and you're going to put it here in one of your spare fuse slots. So if you look, every car is different, but there are certain areas that have no pins. Just put it in there as a safety so that you have this spare. That's it. And then fuse board goes back. Fuse cover goes back on. You are all set with power wiring. Now let me show you the ground. You're going to need a ratchet and a 10 millimeter. If you have an electric ratchet, that works well. So make sure righty-tighty, lefty-loosey.
And let's go ahead and position everything for the ground.
So from your pedals, right, you're going to swivel up and kind of focus in on that ground ring. Okay, it's a ground wire with a 10 millimeter bolt going to it. You're going to use your 10 millimeter ratchet with a long socket, and you're going to get into that bolt, take it out, and your ground ring is going to get sandwiched in there. So I'm going to go in, and you can feel for this bolt too. It's right there. You just grab it. And it's okay if it's a tight squeeze. Things don't want to play easily, but and this is one of those times where if you have an electric ratchet, it works wonders. Of course, the ground bolt doesn't want to play nice and be taken out by hand. There we go. So you want to just take the bolt out. The wires will stay in there. You're going to pull your ground ring, loop it through the bolt, and it back in. Tighten up my hand. And then take your ratchet, finish the job. If all goes well, at that point, once you've tightened this, your gauges should turn on. You want to tighten this as tight as it was before. You want to kill it because it's a small bolt, but you want to make sure that both the lines, the original ground wire and your gauge wire are not moving at all. And then you just zip tie the gauge wire harness up to the top with the other wires. And then going back here, you just want to make sure that this is tucked away like that, right? And then to put this back on, you have to bend it, and you see this white tab right here. So if you can bring the camera right to this hole, you see that white thing? This has a little tab right where my fingers are that slides into that. There, like that. And that's it. That's not coming out. It's the same thing with the opposite side. So now this wiring harness is right here. It's tucked away, and you're all set. So, 2 more things before you're done inside. These boost lines, like I said before, you're just going to need to zip tie them. So, I cut this one before because I was testing something out. But, put the zip tie on. And of course it's going to fight you. But, you know, once again, patience is key. So, put it on. And right here, there's a barb fitting. You want to make sure that this is all the way on and that you're basically putting the zip tie on the barb fitting and not on anything else. Pull. Make sure it's tight. Like that. And then take a pair of snips and cut this because this is sharp-ish plastic and it will cut anything around it. So you want to make sure that tip is as small as possible. So once again, double check, barb fittings all the way on, and tighten it. And this will ensure that in the case of over boosting, if that ever happens or anything like that, you won't lose one of these connections and then your boost gauge will just crap out. It's more crucial to have this done if you have an electronic boost controller that doubles as your boost gauge, because if the electronic boost controller can't sense boost, it will not cut and it will not open the wastegate. So, once again, make sure it's on the barb fitting. There it is. It's not coming off. It's tight. There. And snip, snip. Trash. So the last bit is to now connect all of the OEM connectors to the gauges. I mean, like I said, you're going to tuck all of the wiring harness for the gauges. And you're going to make it as clean as possible so that you have all the space that you need right here, like so. So this is going to be the tight part because these connectors don't really have that much leeway. I've made the gauges extremely long so that you don't have any forcing. You're not forcing it or pushing anything where it's not supposed to go. Cigarette lighter just pushes in. All of these gauges, all of these OEM connectors now just push in. That's how they work. The cigarette lighter is the 2 black ones, and then you have this 16-pin connector that goes parallel to the cigarette lighter. It's the pain one. It's the heartbreaker. I really like to play along, and this is the one that's going to put all the tension on the harness. But once it's connected, you're all set. I think this is your climate control. There. So you just have 3 connectors left. And as we said before, this connects to your OEM cluster, so this is not going to be used anymore. So just tuck this away. So you're all set. Now, you have this one that goes to your passenger airbag sensor and your hazard lights and your AC climate control unit. And like I said, depending on your trim level, you're going to have 5 or 6 connectors. Sometimes I've seen 7 on like a track model that has the nav and everything else. So you're going to make sure that everything's tucked away. And you're going to slide it up like so. Push in. It's going to click. You're going to make sure that everything is tight in there. Once that's in, this one slides in from the bottom and clicks on. Make sure everything lines up. Nothing's sticking out. Gauges are lined up. Now you have power and ground. Moment of truth. And so now, if the memory function is working because you've wired it up properly, these now retain the memory. This one doesn't have memory function, but it's basically going to do the exact same thing. These ones will retain, right? So we set them to red, white, and blue because Merca, and they're staying as red, white, and blue. So just a quick overview of some of the stuff. I'm going to go in depth on it more. Depending on what buttons you're pressing, you're going to access the settings. If you're pressing the memory one, on these gauges, these two, the memory button will set what the warning is at. So right now, if your oil pressure while the car is running is less than 20, it will beep at you and it'll give you the warning, right? So now it's set to that. If you press and hold the left button, it now beeps as a setting. And if it's warning you of something, if the oil pressure drops, it will beep as well as flash at you that the oil pressure is low. If you press both at the same time, I forget, I think it's dimmer. I have to go through all of this because it's been a while. But, so,
Yep.
if you press that, that changes the dim setting on the gauge. And this is one of the memory settings again. Alright, so nighttime driving, or if you're just too sensitive to it, press and hold, and you're all set. If you press the right one, that's the dim setting. If you press and hold two buttons, it will give you the recall. So right now, this is as high as it's been, but if you press and hold both of these buttons, let's say your oil pressure skyrocketed to 60 psi once, and you wanted to see what the highest it was, press those two buttons, it'll go to it. So, scroll through everything, that's basically it.
Now, there's some regular values, what you're actually going to be looking at. The way this one's configured right now, you've got on the left-hand side is your oil pressure, right? This right now we have this one set up the wideband and boost. It's right here in the middle, and then this one is oil temp on the right. On the oil pressure, what you're going to be looking at is probably when you first start it up, it's going to be pretty high, like 60 something psi when you first start it up. You guys are going to be running Rotella T6 from Shell, and that's it's 5W40 full synthetic. So you're gonna see some higher oil pressure at first. Once the turbo and everything heats up, your car heats up, which you're gonna use your oil temp sensor to kind of keep track of. Yeah. You'll see your oil pressure drop down. You'll start to be in around 30 or so, give or take. Idle. Yeah, cruising idle. It might go down to 25 or so. Yeah. We can. That's kind of where it should be. And then your oil temp, you're going to be at first, you're going to start off at maybe 100 and stuff, and then it's going to quickly rise up because you got a turbo, it's going to heat it up. Yeah. And you're going to want to, obviously, you're not going to get into boost until you're 170? 160, 170. Yeah, 160, 170. You don't want to be boosting before that. Yep. And it's possible you get up to 2.
Depending on how hot it gets, you will have a cooler, right? Yeah. So the oil cooler will definitely help temps, but if you're in a place that's constantly over 105 degrees, like if you're in Texas and Florida, the down south areas, the temperatures might rise up closer to the 200s, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. The operating temperature of the T6 is anywhere from 180 to 215. Yeah. Once you see it start to go over 220, 225, that's when you want to set the warning for this so that it tells you, hey, you're overheating the oil, you're cooking it. And then, if you end up overheating the oil, what's going to happen is your pressures are going to drop because the oil is going to thin out more. So once you establish what your normal pressures are and what your normal temperatures are, you want to keep that as your baseline. You want to make sure that, hey, in the back of my head, my car runs at 185 and cruising pressures are like 30, 40, 50 psi. Wide open throttle, it goes to 70, 80, whatever. You know, idle is like 15, 20. So if you start to see anything different than that, that's your warning. Okay? You never want to run outside of those parameters. Whatever your established baseline is, you don't want to run thinner viscosity. You don't want to overheat your oil by, tracking it and not paying attention to that, because then your oil pressure drops. You end up starving the motor, it starts knocking. That's what causes a lot of the issues. And that's why we're recommending T6 right now until we do further research and testing on the Remnant turbo kit with different types of oils, and we figure out which one actually works really well.
Yeah.
But this is basically how the gauges are going to work. And a real quick recap, if you're seeing a number with 2 brackets on the wideband gauge, that's an error code. Right now, error code 3 means it's not sensing the AFR sensor. There's a calibration sequence for this. Right now, we did the first step by starting up the gauge without having the sensor connected. Okay? The gauge calibrates itself without the sensor, and it'll give you that code. What you're going to do next is turn off the vehicle, connect the gauge, and hold it up in free air. So the connector that I showed you before, you connect that to the AFR sensor, hold it in free air, and turn the vehicle on. It'll calibrate it, right? And then it'll give you a different error code, or it'll just say 20. Okay? 20 means it's lean. That's as lean as the gauge is reading. That means it's in free air. There's no fuel being burnt around it. Let that sit for another 20 seconds, and then turn the vehicle off again. Then connect the AFR sensor to your exhaust. Tighten everything up. I found that it's a lot easier to disconnect the sensor when the gauge is off, tighten the sensor or the AFR sensor itself into the exhaust, and then reconnect it again, because you're going to end up twisting the cable and it's going to fight you going in. So disconnect, tighten it in with a little bit of anti-seize on the threads. Once it's all tight, connect the sensor again and run it, and you'll be fine. Okay. The last thing that I want to say about the wideband boost is this sweeping function is telling you if you're in vacuum or in boost. A lot of people will look at this and be like, oh, I'm in negative 30 psi. No, that's not correct. You're in negative 30 inches of mercury. This whole part is vacuum. You are going to be looking at anywhere from 15 to 21 inches of vacuum. That's normal. If this starts fluctuating, there's an issue. If this is lower than that at idle, there's an issue. This is very crucial. Knowing what good vacuum is for your motor is very important to telling you the health of that motor. If you've lost compression, you will lose vacuum. If you have a vacuum or a boost leak, meaning one of the hoses is popped off or something to the intake manifold is not tight, you will have a vacuum leak. Your engine will not run properly. So understand, and there's going to be a chart that I'm going to show you and post, understand what vacuum is for your motor. Once you're going to hit boost, right, this is calibrated for 45 psi. So at wastegate pressure, you're going to be a little bit over the 5. Depending on when your wastegate actuates, right, you're going to have 2 ticks, maybe 1 more, okay? For people that are going to be running higher boost, it's going to go up depending on what it is. Each one of these ticks, once you hit boost, is 2.5 psi, okay? So you're going to be looking right around there, maybe a little higher depending on how much you're going to be running, and then when you let off, it's going to go into vacuum, okay? That's the majority for gauges. Let's go put the sensors in. Now that the gauges are all wired in the cabin, you don't have to worry about them. Everything's out here. I'm going to talk about 2 out of these 3. The boost hose, or this vacuum hose right here, we're going to talk about later when we're putting the final stuff together. This one, the sensor wires, you're going to route these under the intake manifold and the throttle body so that they don't get touched by anything, so they don't get burned, like so, right? And you're going to zip tie them to the front over here, and it's going to be routed close to the dipstick to the sensors. And I found that it's easier to clip them in to the sensors from underneath the car. So, oil pressure sensor is going in the back, right here. only goes in one way. There's going to be a little tab for it to click in, and that's it. The oil temperature sensor goes all the way around and connects here. Now you might notice that this is an extremely long harness right now. So what you can do is zip tie them together like this. That way nothing will move. Once it's zip tied, you can probably zip tie it here, or you can zip tie it close to the harness for the fan. That way nothing's going to touch them, they're not going to vibrate, and they're not going to hit anything hot. Okay? That's your wiring for the sensors. The final one is your AFR gauge. Now, this harness already comes with a cable tie. What I'm going to do is I'm going to tie it after looping it. I'm going to loop it like this. And I'm going to run it around the battery so that it sits nice and snug right here. So pretend that this is looped. It's going to sit here like this. And then it's going to get routed around the ground cable. And it's going to sit right here in the front. That way it's not going to move or hit anything. You might want to remove the battery terminal, or this hold down, so that you can get the wire through it. It might make it a little easier on you. But you want this cable not to move at all. Okay? So yeah, take the 10mm bolt off and run it under here to sit here. The O2 sensor for it, the AFR sensor, is right here, and it'll clip onto it. It only goes in one way, so it'll just sit here where it's tucked. Okay? So this will just go around here in this area. And that way your O2 sensor won't hit anything. That's it for gauges. Once you're done with that, you're all set.
All right, see you on the next video.